Hello guys, welcome back to the series of tutorials on C++. I am Deepak Nial, and in this tutorial I am going to continue my previous discussion on exception handling and talk about rethrowing an exception. So sometimes it's possible that an exceptional handler, upon receiving an exception, might decide either that it cannot process that exception or that it can process the exception but partially. So in such cases, the exceptional handler can defer the exception handling or perhaps a portion of it to another exception handler. But in either case, you achieve this by rethrowing the exception via the statement throw. So you already know this keyword from the previous lecture, right? So to understand this, I will just take an example. Suppose you have a try block and you are throwing some exception from here. Throw exception. So basically you are generating exception here. And the exception that you are throwing here is an instance of standard library class exception. Then you have to catch this exception, and you can do so by using this statement exception, right? And here we are going to handle the exception. While handling the exception, you might print something, and as we are handling the exception partially here, so we can print handling the exception partially. But if we are handling the exception partially here, where will the full processing take place? So for that, you can write throw here, and in this way this statement is going to rethrow the exception for further processing. Now this exception will be thrown to caller function of this function, or the function where this code is defined, right? So regardless of whether a handler can process an exception or not, the handler can rethrow the exception and it will be further processed outside the handler. So the next enclosing try block detects the rethrown exception, which a catch handler listed after the enclosing try block attempts to handle. So now I will create a program for this, and then we will understand the rethrowing an exception using that example. Okay, now here we are to show the demo or working example of rethrowing an exception. So here is the code on the left side, which we are writing since the beginning. But now I am going to add a new header file here, which is exception, and it provides us the standard library class exception. So I will begin with a function int main, and this int main is going to write a try block and a catch block, and from the try block we are going to call a function. So I want to name that function throw exception, because this function is going to throw some exception. That's why I named it as throw exception. So let's create a function first, make it void throw exception, and inside this function I am going to create a try block and a catch block. So let's begin from this function. First print a message, and now after this message we are going to throw an exception, and the exception that we are going to throw here is instance of the standard library class exception. And as we are throwing exception, we need to catch it also. So we need to catch it in this way, exception ampersand. You can also put a variable name here, which is argument name in this case, and you can choose to catch this exception or catch a part of it and defer the handling to calling function, and the calling function in this case is int main. So let's print a message here first, and then we are printing another message here. It will read through exception for further processing. After that, as we are not catching this exception here, so we need to write keyword throw, and now this is going to rethrow this exception, which will be handled by this main function. After that, you can print a message, but this statement will never be printed. I am writing this statement for just testing purpose. You can also write some message here, and after this statement you can write something else, and this statement will also never be printed because we are throwing an exception here in this function, which is rethrowing the exception again, and we need to catch that exception here in this catch block using the same methodology we applied in our function. You can write some another message here, rethrown exception caught in main. And as this exception is handled properly, so this program will continue after this, right? So we have created this program. Now try to compile this program. Program name is rethrow exception, and you can see program has been compiled successfully. Now run it, and here is the output. So call through exception, this is the statement which is being printed, and it's here. After that, when this is being called, it will print this message, function through exception throws in exception, and this is the second statement here. After this, we have another statement, exception handled in function through exception, and this is the statement. Another statement is it will throw rethrow exception for further processing, and this is the another statement, right? And you can see this statement is never being printed, right? Neither this statement is being printed, and the statement that is being printed after this is rethrown exception caught in main function, which is this. And when this exception is being handled properly, now program continues after catch in main, right? So this is the output. Let's try one more thing here. We have this thing called throw exception. It is throwing an exception and it is again rethrowing the exception. So let me do one thing. Don't try to handle this exception in main. I will write it here and then try to compile this program, run it, and you can see function through exception throws an exception, which is this message. Exception handled in function through exception, it will throw rethrow exception, and all these things are printed. Now you can see this program has been terminated after throwing an instance of std scope resolution operator exception what, and this program is aborted. And why this program is being aborted? Because we are rethrowing the exception but we are not catching it. So let's try to comment this out and then see if this program is again terminated abnormally or not. So I hope this program is not going to terminate abnormally now, because we have not rethrown the exception, right? And we are now printing this will never be printed. This is being printed because we are not rethrowing the exception, and now this is going to be printed. Clear? So let's remove this thing, and after this thing it's again going to be terminate abnormally, which you can see here. So the solution for this is just put a try catch block around this so that you can handle this rethrown exception. Try to compile it and try to see the output, right? Okay, last thing what I can do, I can check the status, and now I have created this program. I will add this program and then I will commit it using git commit -m rethrow an exception, and now I have to push this file to origin master. It will ask me for the username and now some password, and you can see all these things are pushed to my GitHub account, and now you can see all these codes there, right? So now I hope you have a fair idea about exception handling and rethrowing an exception and then handling it again. So if you have any query or any doubt regarding any of these things, like exception handling or working with the Git or GitHub, you can always ask these things in comments and I will try to respond back as soon as possible. So guys, see you in the next video with some new concept. Till then, thank you so much.